This is Matthew Cratter from Bitcoin University, and today I wanted to talk about the central banksters laughing at you. When I first came across this quote, I could hardly believe it was true. I'll put this clip in the description notes below. New Zealand governor of the Reserve Bank, which is the central bank there, says central banking is, quote, a great business to be in where you print money and people believe you. It looks like he just spoke the silent part out loud accidentally. It's a great business to be in central banking. You print money and people believe it. Yes, that's true. They don't teach these things in government, public schools. So most people do believe central bankers' lies, and even professors of economics teach fraudulent theories like Keynesian economics. If you've ever studied that in college, you know what a joke it is and how faulty all of the assumptions are. This is a theory that exists solely to seek to justify massive government overspending and interference in the economy. So most people just go along with the fraud. That is fiat money. They tell themselves that inflation is something natural and beyond our control, like wind or rain, when in fact inflation is created by politicians spending too much and central bankers monetizing that debt, printing money to fill the gap. Even if you don't believe in central banker money, there are men with guns and metal cages that still force you to use it. So this isn't exactly true that people just believe in it. It's forced on us as well, even if we don't believe in it anymore. By contrast, Bitcoin is ethical money. Bitcoin is a completely voluntary system. This is a very, very important difference that a lot of people miss. I just ask you, if you're enjoying this video so far, to please subscribe, like, comment, and share. Bitcoin is a completely voluntary system. It's an opt-in system. There's no coercion. There are no men with guns and metal cages if you don't comply, and you don't have to use Bitcoin if you don't want to. Whereas with fiat money, we don't have a choice. We have men with guns and metal cages who force us to pay our taxes in this fiat currency, and we have central bankers sitting and laughing at us. So who really has the moral high ground here? Are we supposed to listen to Jeffrey Epstein's banker who says that Bitcoin is used for money laundering, fraud, tax avoidance, or as a payment for sex trafficking? Chiefly, this is the same guy who was friends and had to approve this massive settlement payment to Epstein victims. The other question is, how's that central banker money that they push on us, how's that working out for everyone? It doesn't seem to hold its value too well, as we saw with yesterday's inflation report and as we've seen with the inflation of the past few years. This CPI report, which still understated inflation, was especially bad, and we saw the market react to it. Here's the problem: when the Fed's monetary policy is tight, remember these central bankers running everything, laughing at us, forcing their policies on us, they don't know what they're doing. It's a complete disaster, because when the Fed's monetary policy is tight, stocks and housing prices go down. This is what we've seen over the last couple of years. Then the U.S. government collects less revenue in terms of capital gains taxes, which are a large portion of government tax revenue. U.S. government collects less of this because asset prices are down, and thus it needs to borrow. The U.S. government needs to borrow more money, in other words, issue more government bonds to make up the difference. Russia and China don't want to buy this garbage paper anymore for obvious reasons. So who is the buyer of last resort? It is the Fed, as always. Fed policy, whether it's tight or loose, but even when it's tight, always leads to the Fed having to bail out the system even more with the money printers, because fiat is a debt-based system, and we can see how close the U.S. system is to collapse. If we take a look at the U.S. debt clock and we add up the large expenditures, the large budget items, which are down here: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, defense, and interest on the debt. And what's extraordinary is if you just take those estimates, you add them up, you end up with 4.65 trillion of expenditures just for these budget items. Taxes over the past 12 months have been just a tiny bit more than that at 4.66 trillion. So this is one reason we have giant budget deficits, because these large budgetary items, and this is ignoring all the wonderful things that are in the government budget, including, for example, maintaining 77,000 empty Fed buildings at an annual cost of $1.7 billion. So it's one thing to pay taxes if the government actually uses it for something useful, but if it's just going to ship it overseas for wars or completely waste the money, I think it's quite immoral. Central bankers have lost control. After yesterday's inflation report, Treasury yields were sharply higher. The dollar, in terms of the Dixie index, was sharply higher. Stocks were sharply lower. And what did Bitcoin do? Bitcoin had a very shallow pullback and now is very, very strong. This morning, Bitcoin is showing extremely strong relative strength compared to other asset classes. And I think what's happening here, many of you have asked, is that Bitcoin is clearly looking past temporarily tight Fed monetary policy and anticipating money printer go burr. It's looking through the current tight policy towards the eventual money printers. If the Fed stays too tight, it bankrupts the U.S. government and blows up the U.S. banking system again, as it did a year ago. If the Fed loosens and prints, then inflation comes roaring back even more with a vengeance. So what I've been asking myself is there something that I can invest in, that I can hold, that's outside of the fragile banking system, which the Fed risks blowing up again, and that's also immune to central bank monetary debasement? And very fortunately, we do have this asset now, and that is Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin is the answer to Fed monetary policy, whatever it is. It's very volatile, of course, but if you dollar cost average in, it's a very, very good store of value. By contrast, U.S. Treasuries, U.S. government debt are a very bad store of value. And if you're still holding any U.S. Treasuries, you might want to take a look at this chart. I hadn't looked at it for a while and was absolutely shocked when I pulled it up yesterday. This is Bitcoin divided by TLT, which is a long-term Treasury government bond, U.S. government bond ETF. And when this chart is moving higher, that means Bitcoin is strengthening against U.S. government bonds. When the chart moves lower, it means government bonds are strengthening against Bitcoin. And we can see that this chart is clearly breaking out as Bitcoin continues to eat the world, in this case, eating U.S. Treasuries, which are the global reserve asset. What you're seeing in this chart is Bitcoin replacing Treasuries over time as the global reserve asset. And we're breaking to new highs, as you would expect. This is another sign of the money printers on the way. Another part of this same talk coming out of New Zealand was the central banker, the same guy, saying that Bitcoin is not a means of exchange or medium of exchange. It's not a store of value, and it's not a unit of account. None of which is true. There are lots of people who use Bitcoin these days as a medium of exchange. I buy things with Bitcoin. You can see here in El Salvador, people use Bitcoin. People use Bitcoin in Bitcoin Jungle in Costa Rica. This is an emerging medium of exchange. And you can see that's a pretty good store value as well. It keeps strengthening against all these central banker currencies. And that's interesting. This could be why the central bankers are so angry about it, because their tokens continue to lose value against Bitcoin. This is how the US dollar token holds value over time. This is how Bitcoin holds value over time. So we really should not listen to these central banksters. They can do whatever they want. Central banksters, you do you. As for me, I'm just going to hodl some Bitcoin and spend it whenever and with whomever I please. And it's important to remember there's a special circle in hell, as Dante told us, reserved for smug central banksters. And it's pretty cold there. So these people, I hope they don't forget to pack a parka when the time comes. It looks pretty icy in the ninth circle of hell. And surely the central bankers should know what's coming. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.